I guess I'm the author of the Complete Guide to Middle Earth, and Dick and I have known each other for like 50, 60, a long time. And
Closer to 60 than 50 years.
yes,
Yes.
and you have been doing a lot of things with Tolkien over the years, together and sometimes separately.
That's awesome. And Dick, why don't you just a really brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. I'm Dick Plotz. My Tolkien connection is that I inadvertently started the Tolkien Society of America, which led to 17 magazines sending me to Oxford to interview Tolkien, which was fabulous. I met Christopher Tolkien on that visit. I visited him and Bailey with my wife, Judy, several years later when they were still living in England. And I've done nothing serious connected to Tolkien in the last 50 years or so.
Well, your experiences in the early days of fandom are fascinating, I'm sure. So it's not uncommon for people to kind of dip their toes in and out of various interests and passions, etc. So we're really happy to have both of you here. It's fantastic to put a face to a name that I've known for decades, just on paper. I have a collection of all of the old Nikuses and all of the Tolkien journals from the day, and
it's Niekas.
Niekas.
Niekas. See,
Yes.
It's one of those things where you read it in print for
Right. It's Lithuanian,
decades.
Lithuanian,
Yep.
and it means nothing.
Awesome.
I mean, it means something. It means the word nothing.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely. So again, thank you guys so much for being here. When I originally reached out for guests for Tolkien Reading Day, Bob, it was you, because we were talking about your Complete Guide to Middle Earth. So why don't we start there a little bit, if you want to just reminisce a little on why you started writing the book, or doing the index cards, which was before the book.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that, and I'm not entirely sure why. The the best explanation I have is that I'm my grandfather's grandson, and he was just extremely fond of taking notes about books, and just one of his hobbies, which helped some authors and annoyed other authors, was he had this habit of taking books that had already been published and sending letters to the author, telling them various mistakes in grammar, spelling, style. And this varied. So some authors, many authors did not respond. Some authors got huffy about it. Some of them hired him to proofread their next books, which explains why I have a signed first edition of a book by Upton Sinclair.
That's awesome.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah, and Dick, what triggered you way back in the early days for Tolkien? I mean, I'm sure reading the books was sort of the seed that first planted it, but it kind of ballooned.
I will tell you where and when, the day I first encountered Lord of the Rings. It was August 19th, 1963. And I know that because it was the 19th birthday of my cousin Sarah, who is still around, lives in London. And I was at her birthday party in Brooklyn, and her other grandmother had given her The Lord of the Rings. She was, I guess, an English major at Vassar. And she had heard about Tolkien because it came up in her old English class. So I looked at this and I saw the maps. I've always loved maps. And I should find out more about this. And then I didn't. And then a year or two later, 2 years later, I was on a cross-country car trip with my parents, and I got a letter because Bob had my addresses that he could write to me at. You should read The Lord of the Rings. So I said, oh, yes, that book. Yes, I should read The Lord of the Rings. And I was in Santa Fe. I went to a little bookstore in Santa Fe, and they didn't have The Lord of the Rings. They had The Hobbit. It was a children's book. So I figured I'd get back to New York and I'd read The Lord of the Rings because I could buy it there, which I did. And it went on from there. So I'm trying to think. No, it was 64. So it was 1 year later, because in 65, I started the Tolkien Society. So I was going to the Columbia Science Honors Program. So I took the subway from Brooklyn to Morningside Heights. And I got out of the subway at 116th Street one day, and there was some stuff written in Tangwar on a place where ordinarily there would be a large ad poster, but it was just black paper, so it was great to write on in chalk. And then it wasn't there the next week. And then I decided I wanted to meet these people, and I put up a sign on on a poster saying Tolkien Club meeting, alma mater, and I gave the date and the time. And something like 10 people showed up. It was about 10 degrees out. And we talked for a while, and somebody said that they had heard that somebody actually knew the Elvish language. How was I going to find that out? Well, I was just getting into adult subscriptions, not highlights for children, but I was a subscriber to the New Republic. So I put a 3-line classified in the New Republic, join Tolkien Club, discuss Hobbit lore, learn Elvish. You probably read about this before. And I got about 70 responses. And I found myself with a national, but to some extent international fan club on my hands, which I handled probably not really adequately, but adequately enough. And it got me the invitation from 17 magazine to go to Oxford and interview Tolkien. It got me, I met people like W.H. Auden and Donald Swann of Flanders and Swann. So sometimes I feel like Forrest Gump. There are all these people that I've met that I don't really qualify to. I'm not a literary type, but it's sort of fun, having these memories. So I don't know. Ask me what you want to know.
When
awesome.
you met Tolkien, where did you actually meet him?
I went to his house in
Okay.
Headington, Sandfield Road, and I actually saw his wife when he came out of the house, but he didn't entertain visitors in his house, at least visitors that he didn't know well. He had a little separate office or think house, whatever, I don't know what he would have called it, but a very crowded, busy little office, books all over the place and papers. And I talked to him for a while. I don't remember how long. I didn't really know how to interview anybody. I didn't know what to ask. I didn't know. I've never been very good at taking notes, so it wasn't easy to write up afterward. It's a story in itself.
What do you remember about him? Like, what stood out to you?
If you can imagine, he's a I guess a Gandalf type, an old man with a pipe and uh, a sort of academic way of speaking, but he was talking about interesting things. I asked him some things about Elvish vocabulary. He sent me the noun declension, which has been published now. He was very welcoming. He was, I guess, a little bit bemused that he had all this fan base, that he never intended that. It just happened, and he didn't really know what to do with it. But he was, he was cordial and welcoming. I think pleased to talk with this kid.
That's amazing. And Bob, you guys were friends at this time, I think from high school, it sounds like. And so
yes,
some of what Dick had been doing kind of led into your starting to put together the encyclopedic entries, if you will, for the guide, didn't it?
Yeah, yes. It was the indexes in the Tolkien books were really not helpful in and again, it just seemed like a natural thing for me to do. There had already been in Niekus someone who had been doing a little bit of a glossary, but then he disappeared. And, picking that kind of work up just seemed natural to me.
Yeah.
I understand that you that obviously use index cards. What sort of quantity of these were you looking at?
Well, their actual index cards are a little thicker than paper, but let's see, probably 3 feet.
3 feet.
Wow, that is a lot of index cards.
Yes.
I hope you didn't drop them at any point. That would have been.
Well, as alphabetizing can be fun.
You couldn't just press sort.
No.
Right.
Yeah, we're kind of getting this apples and oranges with talking with James earlier. I don't know if Dick or Bob, you were listening to the earlier panels, but we had James Tauber on. He's a friend of mine who's doing digital humanities work. So all computer sorting, cross-referencing, indexing, and it's just, night and day from how it was in the 1960s. But it's no less of a passion and a fan-based activity. It's just, we all work with the tools that we have at hand at the time. Yeah, so tell us, the theme of Tolkien Reading Day this year is love and friendship. So I'd love to hear just the two of you kind of talk a little bit about your friendship with each other and kind of how that went back in these heady days of Tolkien fandom.
Well, we were already friends. It's not like
Yep.
we met because of Tolkien. I'm not sure what grade we were in when we met. Do you remember, Dick?
Must have been 10th because you weren't there in 9th. You came in from junior high, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I came from a private grade 8 school. So I was there in high school in 9th grade, which I would guess maybe a quarter or a fifth of the class was there in 9th grade, and the rest came in. So we met, we were in honors pretty much right away when you arrived.
Yeah, and it didn't hurt that going past your house was literally on the shortest route from school to where I lived. So
I had forgotten that, but yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that bridge on Albemarle Road that goes over the train tracks was always fun.
Yeah, it hasn't been there for years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that must have been when you were around 15 years old, 16-ish or so. Sounds about right. And then when
Well,
I think
you
you
were, I
guys were
guess
still in high
you
school.
were, I'm trying to think. Really, so you were 14. I was 15 because I'm a year older.
Probably, yeah. Yes, because you're a year older because I skipped third grade.
Yeah, and that so you must have been really young when you traveled to England then, Dick.
I was 18.
Yeah.
18. I had finished high school. I had started college. I was sort of floundering in college, not really knowing. I mean, I had to study, which I had never had to do before very much. So I didn't really know what I was doing. And then I was asked in November of my first semester in college, I was sent to England, and that distracted me even further. And I ended up dropping out and starting over again the next year, uh, which was great. There was uh, my class at Harvard, class of 71. It was not the best time academically to be in college because there was so much stuff going on. And Harvard President Pusey famously at one point called us the worst class ever at Harvard. I think that was an exaggeration because there was a class, I think in the 1840s, that acted out and the entire class was expelled. Maybe it was the 1820s. But Pusey wasn't around then. In any case, the worst class ever at Harvard includes the current Senate Majority Leader. It includes, let's see, it includes, well-known poets. It includes the president of the University of Pennsylvania, who is currently on leave to be ambassador to Germany. I mean, the worst class ever. I'm very pleased to be in it.
Well, it's not a knock. You've had a great career and a great life since then. So,
Yes.
So,
yeah. So Bob, your book, it sounds like, fingers crossed that there'll be another edition coming out this year. I think it's been out of print for almost a decade, maybe more than a decade now. I'm trying to remember when it last was in print, but yeah, so that's kind of resuscitating it for you, right? You haven't been involved in it for a long time, but
well, that's a interesting story in itself. I thought that it was out of print, but in fact, it has been continuously in print. And now that I know that, I'm getting back and talking to what is now Random House, used to be Ballantine, before that used to be Del Rey Books, about making some enhancements to it.
Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, we don't have to go into any detail on that, but I know fans are really excited to see that. It's coming back on the hardcover format. I don't know if you heard us chatting with Ted Naismith earlier today, the artist who illustrated a previous edition of that book, and he's adding a few more pieces to this forthcoming edition. So that's very exciting to see that. Have you? I believe from our previous conversations that you haven't been putting any effort into keeping the guide itself up to date with all the books published since the Silmarillion, right? The last time you really focused on it was in 77 when the Silmarillion was coming out.
That's true. And what I'm thinking, well, the Silmarillion was the last clearly finished work by Tolkien. Since then, everything that he wrote and that was relatively close to being coherently finished, has been published.
Mm-hmm.
And there's at least one of those posthumous works that I think, and I've gotten that I think is close enough to being both different and complete that I think that can be drawn in.
Yeah, I agree.
And the bane of my existence, the bane of my existence as usual is page numbers. It was, no matter what I say, every time a new printing of a book comes out, the page numbering is changed slightly,
mm-hmm.
which makes the page numbers in the complete guide inaccurate.
Yeah, this is something that we talked about earlier, because James, who was on, is actually coming up with a citation system for the books, that it doesn't matter about the page numbers too much, and you can find things in it. But again, it's very difficult to do something like that when they change all the time.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard to, on paper, tie together an indexing system to books that are so popular that they're continuously in print and new editions coming out what feels like annually.
Yes.
Yeah. So Dick, where I'm curious to know just a little bit on you handing off sort of the Tolkien Society of America. I know you were focusing more on school, et cetera, and I think it went to Ed. Is that correct?
That's correct. And then Ed was no longer able to continue with it, and it got folded into the Mythopoeic Society, which is still going strong.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I'm a member of that. Usually, off and on. I think I'm still a member here. I know a lot of friends who are in there that are certainly loving the fact that you've kind of resurfaced and were willing to appear today. And this is for both of you. It's a large part of the community of Tolkien fandom is the different generations that have come and gone and the history of it. And there's a few of us who are really fascinated with the early history of fandom from the 50s and the appearances that started to show up in some of the science fiction fanzines and the Worldcon documentation there. And then, of course, the Tolkien Society of America and the Tolkien Society in the UK is really when things exploded. I'm going to ask Chad, Andrew, if you have any other questions you want to ask. We're coming up on the end of our allotted time. I think we could go for hours, but we need to try and wrap up.
No, I would like to say that one of my favourite reference books for Tolkien is Bob's book. So I'm very pleased it's coming back into hardback and people are able to get a copy. We regularly were asked, how can I get a copy of the previous version? And it's really nice that it's just coming back into availability for people to get.
Yeah, Bob, I want to thank you.
Well, you can, it's available on Amazon. So
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Bob, yep. I want to thank you as well. I mean, it was probably the first Tolkien reference book I ever had, and it was in the days before the internet and the very early days of the internet where you couldn't just look things up. It was something that I used quite often.
Yep. Even Christopher Tolkien said that it was his go-to reference book when he was trying to keep track of everything that his father had written. So, yeah, just in summary, again, thank you so much, both of you, for appearing. I'd love to chat with you some more. We'll see what we can arrange at some vague point in the future, but I really want to say thank you for appearing here today. It's been awesome to meet you sort of virtually in person. I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, and thank you. I mean, it's fun to think about what I was doing 50 years ago.
Fun for us too.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Thanks for inviting us.